Well, hi, Supervisor Rodoni. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. Hope you're having a good day so far. I was wondering if, to start off, could you tell me a bit about your role as a supervisor and like what inspired you to like run for public office?
Sure. Thank you for the question. It's good to be here. So I'm Dennis Rodoni. I'm born and raised in West Marin, native Marinite, and I've had a great career in business as a general contractor, doing custom homes and remodels out in Point Reyes, Inverness area, and I was involved in the North Marin Water District for 21 years as a board member. So when this seat, District 4, became vacant, I felt I was certainly qualified and could do some good work here at the county because I know West Marin so well. And the seat, District 4, is thought of as West Marin's seat. In reality, though, it's much more complicated than that because West Marin now is only about 25% of the district. The other areas of the District 4 include Corte Madera, Homestead Valley, Green Bay Boardwalk, 2 precincts in Larkspur, San Quentin Prison and Village, East San Rafael, the Canal, and Bay Point and Spinnaker Point, and West Novato, portions of West Novato, including some city blocks now.
Right, that's definitely a huge land area. I mean, I understand that each of the districts, different districts they divide within the county has about like 50,000 people. But since West Marin is it's very spread out and not as populated there. I mean, do you ever find it a bit of a challenge to try to pretty much get to address all of the issues in all of the different districts, or what do you think?
Definitely a challenge, and West Marin. And we can probably follow up on this comment too. West Marin is becoming less and less populated, and it's because of basically second homeowners or homes being used for short-term rental if they don't have permanent residents in them anymore. And so to balance the population, every time there's a census, my district usually ends up grabbing a piece of the Eastern Marin to include in the district. It is a challenge because there's quite a diversity in the residents that I represent, from the Canal of San Rafael to Seadrift and Stinson Beach is sort of the two examples that I use often. However, it actually, while being a challenge, it's really, really rewarding to be able to cover such a great area and represent so many people with different backgrounds, really. And unlike some of the other districts, I only have really one central city, Corte Madera, that the city council actually does a lot of the government there. The rest of them are on the outskirts of cities, or like Homestead, which is unincorporated. But the most beautiful part certainly is the West Marin area, which is Muir Beach to Dillon's Beach.
Oh, so. Yeah. I mean, I'm new to Marin. I mean, I grew up in Southern California, and I was going to school in Berkeley. And I feel like as someone, I'm moving to Marin, but I'm someone who's always liked to go to like the Point Reyes area for day trips and stuff like that. But I imagine with all the there's always a bunch of tourists like me that like to come in like for doing day trips. And I can imagine that it definitely makes an impact in terms of both positive and negative, I would imagine, in terms of, negative being, gas and the amount of people going there. And I hear that the septic systems, I imagine that can lead to overuse of them as well.
Yeah. So the challenge at West Marin is that we have what we have there and the beauty of it, and it's protected, and the agricultural that's there is all part of the Park Service being there and the National Park Service being there, that the county being good stewards of its land. And so, those all bring benefits, but they also have things that cause problems in your community, as you mentioned, septic systems that are overused. But also part of that is being a part of the coastal zone. And Coastal Act is making sure there's access to everyone in our state and our country and any visitor to come to the coast. And so, that in itself is a good thing because it's allowed us to protect so much extra space and extra land and keep it accessible for everyone.
Out of all the land in West Marin, how much would you say is able to be zoned for housing? Because I understand the majority of it is zoned, like rightly so, like for the environment and like preservation and all of that. But there's also just from my own experience, like driving through like Highway 1, there's a lot of there's a lot of agriculture there, which is why there's so much land preserved for it. But I was really curious about like how much affordable housing there is in that area, especially for those workers there as well.
Yeah, so I don't know the numbers, but the best way to describe it is every village that you go through in West Marin is zoned for residential. And as you move out from the village, it becomes a less dense zoning where there may be 1 acre per household or up to 5 acres per household. I think in Nicasio it even gets bigger than that, to 20 or 25 acres per household. And that was done intentionally to protect the green belt in Marin County. The county-wide plan, has incorporated that as part of the agriculture and greenbelt protection, with the 101 corridor being the focus of where the build-out would be, or most of the build-out. As far as affordable housing in West Marin, we're struggling with permanent housing, all permanent housing, affordable and otherwise, just because there's not a great supply there. And we talked a little bit earlier about second homes and short-term rentals, which also have caused it to be less supply for permanent rentals. And so we're working on ideas about how to develop more ADUs, accessory dwelling units related to that, both junior units and regular units that help property owners that have a second home or a short-term rental maybe develop an ADU or a JDU for a permanent residence, so that people who work in the communities can find permanent housing. And it has a effect all the way down the line, because our schools are seeing less and less children because people can't afford to live there. Right. Ultimately, our businesses suffer because when the tourists aren't there, there's less and less regular full-time people to come in and shop and buy their goods. So I think that it's a challenge that we're going to be dealing with in the near future, and probably an ongoing challenge because of that other side of the equation, of being a very popular tourist destination. And part of the Coastal Act is to provide facilities for visiting tourists. And so we're trying to walk that fine line of needing full-time permanent housing and providing housing for the tourists that come, so that we avoid large hotels and things like that on the coast. So.
Yeah, I mean, in order to connect all the different villages and the houses together, I mean, if you don't have a car, it's pretty difficult to get anywhere, especially with the roads being narrow. What is the public transit like there, or are there any plans to expand public transit in the West Marin area?
So public transit in West Marin is fairly limited. I can remember when Golden Gate Transit used to go out all the way to Inverness and have a bus that went to San Francisco at one point. As they've had to cut their budget, they've certainly eliminated a lot of those routes. We now have the Marin Transit shuttle that runs out there. I think it's a pretty regular basis every day, including weekends, and it hits all the small villages of West Marin, mostly Point Reyes and the Park Service and Olema and the central West Marin, but it does go. There's another route that goes through Bolinas and Stinson. So that's really the only public transit that we have. Certainly whistle stops and other types of transit for disabled and seniors is available too, but it's pretty limited. One of the successes we've had in West Marin has been the Muir Woods shuttle, which at last count had carried about 130 or 40,000 visitors to Muir Woods, which means that's a substantial number of cars that were taken off the road. And you catch that at the Sausalito near the small water airport in Sausalito, and you make reservations. And also down there they have a new reservation system where you have to make reservations ahead of time before you go. So that's been very successful, and so we're looking at that option maybe in a couple other locations out in West Marin to do a shuttle that could both serve the community and also serve the park system and the visitor. So, but it's challenging out there because it's really expensive to run transportation routes out there, much more so because of the low ridership.
Right. It's definitely expensive, which is a huge barrier. I think one good benefit to that is that it would reduce the environmental impact. More people being in the shuttles, and I think that's another reason why in the larger, more populated towns like San Rafael, that's why there's more people that are advocating for like more transit-oriented housing, because and also definitely more railway, expansion of the SMART train, because then I mean, I feel like the people of Marin, we really care about, the environment and preserving our open space, which I'm for. But at the same time, if you're not encouraging that development as well, like public transit, it's actually only hurting the environment as well.
Sure, and I think that's a great plan, because you do need to have public transit available if you're going to build more dense housing, and I think that's the 101 corridor is essentially that's designed for that. Unfortunately, Marin probably didn't do a great job with its developing its transit as good as it could have been, because Marin forever has been an automobile county. Right. And I think so we're playing catch up right now in trying to figure out how to interconnect with SMART. We don't have interconnections with SMART, and so we're trying some pilots, including the little commute bus that's running around Terra Linda. But unfortunately, the fare cost for that bus is really expensive, and so I don't know if we're going to be able to continue that. But that's the interconnection to SMART. But I do think there may be some opportunities with private vendors like Uber and Lyft that maybe could supplement. We can maybe supplement that ride, and they could provide the service. And but I do agree with you that more dense development along the corridor is probably the proper thing to do in Marin. And
there's more jobs there as well.
And there's more jobs there, and there's more transit there, more services there. And quite honestly, Marin has developed in a way that we all take pride in our open space and our green belt and our agriculture, and it was a commitment to protect all that way back when, and when the corridor was identified as being the place that more density can happen. Having said that, I think there's also some limitations to that in terms of what the density should be, because our cities, from an infrastructure point of view, for example, fire engines and fire facilities are designed for a certain number of stories. And if we start changing all that, we're going to have a tremendous cost for infrastructure. So again, it's all about balance and what cities can live with and can provide services for. The transit is a great component of it. And I think it probably will work well for a lot of our millennials. But also, one thing I want to talk about today, there's still that American dream that people want that single-family home with a front and backyard,
right? I mean,
place for their children.
That's a dream for me too.
And it's a dream for everyone, I know.
Right.
And so I think we need to recognize that are we able to provide that ultimate dream? Maybe we can provide more dense housing for an interim solution to a lot of people who are just starting their careers or want to work closer to where they work or closer to transit. But the reality is that people still have that dream, of the American dream of owning a home with a front and backyard. And land costs in Marin, in reality, are way too expensive to have that sort of development, I think, nowadays. And so we probably need to look at what are the other opportunities. And one of the things I often talk about is that land costs are much cheaper in the valleys of California. The missing link there, and this gets back to transportation, in my mind, the missing link is we need high-speed rail to get workers to the work areas like the Silicon Valley and the Bay Area in quickly, less than an hour. And then they can live actually in areas that they want to live in, have their single-family home, have their front and backyard, have good schools for their kids. But that commute that we have now is just unsustainable.
It's not sustainable. I mean, I've commuted from Berkeley to here for about 6 months now, and leaving in the morning. I live about 26 miles away from here, but in the morning, especially because there is the concrete falling on Richmond Bridge, it takes about an hour to get here, or even more, just because it gets so jammed, going into Richmond, crossing the Richmond Bridge to get here. So overall, it's not that's not sustainable. Traffic is only getting worse in the entire Bay Area. I totally agree in that. Everyone's the overall American dream is we all want to have the home with their yard. That's what I want. I mean, I support having more transit oriented development for workers, but at this, but it's not an entirely permanent solution either.
Yeah. Yeah. And the county is recognizing that we can't keep young employees because the commute is just too hard. And so whenever an opportunity comes up to work closer to their home, they're taking advantage of that opportunity, and you can't blame them. And so it's a real issue, and we somehow have to resolve this commute issue and make it easier for people to get to their homes and to work much easier. And I hopefully that some of the conversation will move to that a little bit about be more efficient. I think the idea of the bullet train north and south is probably a great idea. However, it neglected to look at the east and west connection.
Right,
That's probably even more
and I
crucial.
think that people have these ideas about expanding, but it's important to also be like incredibly practical about what are the costs of construction, like what are the costs of making buildings like ADA compliant, adding the septic systems. And I was wondering if like you could touch a bit about your experience. Like I understand like you've been working really hard on the Coast Guard property project, but there's also, I've read about the different barriers and all the different costs that are going into that. So I was wondering if you could talk about your experience.
Sure. So the Coast Guard endpoint raise is by legislation by Congressman Huffman is going to be transferred. The ownership is going to be transferred to the county of Marin for affordable housing, 36 units of affordable housing. And so it's a great opportunity, and I think it's the only project that I know of that's 100% affordable, which is really great. And the congressman has been terrific about this, identifying Marin as the only one that could actually purchase this property. And so we've worked through that with the federal government. We're very close to having an agreement, a purchase agreement, and then we'll move forward with the RFP to do some of the rehabilitation, ADA work, low-flow fixtures type of thing, and also put a septic system in because the federal government actually trucked their sewage by truck up Highway 1 to Turok to dispose of it, and that's never been sustainable and isn't a sustainable way to do it. So we think we will have a septic solution on site, but it will be confined to that quantity of housing. Probably there won't be much opportunity for expansion of housing, but we're quite happy with the numbers, and this is going to provide a great opportunity for people who work in West Marin to have permanent housing, or people who have had to leave West Marin to come back for permanent housing. We have seniors that are interested in this housing. We have ag workers that are interested in this housing. So it's a great opportunity. And for the most part, the challenges have been the bureaucracy of a federal and a county government working on a project, and that's taken time to work through. But hopefully we're at the point now where we can really move through and make some progress. And my personal goal is to get those units online and rented or sold or whatever the ultimate use of them are as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because are there different state regulations versus like I assume that the state gives you certain regulations to follow, but how much like local control are you able to get in terms of governing what you want to do with the Point Reyes property?
So the county has pretty much total control over this, except the Coastal Commission has to sign off on whatever we end up doing with the septic system and or the zoning on the property. And so the state agency has some say over it. But ultimately the county has control over enforcing ADA and making all those accessible opportunities available. And we take it really serious that they are accessible to everyone, and that everyone has an opportunity to rent them. The fair housing is important to us, to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to apply and rent the places there. So,
yeah. I was also wondering about your involvement with CLAM and other like affordable housing, like land trusts and.
Sure. So we're very, very fortunate to have 3 really good affordable housing nonprofits in West Marin, and one nonprofit committee in Stinson Beach that's very active. CLAM is probably one of the more active ones, at least in the Point Reyes Inverness area. Bolinas Land Trust is very active in Bolinas, and San Geronimo Valley covers 3 or 4 different communities there, and they're very active too. They've been very successful as nonprofits to do fundraising, private fundraising from individuals, and they've been very successful in getting grants from the county. CLAM currently has a grant from the county, a 2-year grant at $40,000 a year to develop a rental program with real community rentals where they are helping people and encouraging people to develop a junior accessory unit and provide some permanent long-term housing for members of the community. And in that program, they not only help you go through the permitting process, they have $35,000 grant that's accessible if you need funding to do the JDO, and then they also screen the applicants and match up the person with the rental. And one of the requirements of that program is the landlord has to agree to rent at 30% of the person's income. So it's not based on the unit; it's based on the person that's renting it and their income. And
that's really important because it's all about affordability.
That's
too.
exactly right. So it's a great way to do it, and in some cases there may be other opportunities for landlords through the Section 8 program actually to get market rate and still be renting it affordable. So it's a great program called Rural Community Rentals. They're now doing the same program with the San Geronimo Valley Affordable Housing Group, and Bolinas Land Trust is also part of that program too.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. Do you see like JDUs and like ADUs? Do you hope that maybe more of them will be developed in West Marin or kind of more of the future?
Yeah, I think the opportunity in West Marin is because of the zoning and because of the build out is, again, to take advantage of people being able to have accessory dwelling units and or JDUs. A lot of seniors in West Marin are house rich, but cash poor. And so these are opportunities also to match up permanent renters with seniors, which provide money for maintenance and property taxes, and at the same time providing a home for someone in West Marin. So it's a really nice matchup, and it's also aiding both our seniors and our affordable housing efforts. So
regarding the affordable housing efforts, would you say that there's in the West Marin area, what are the demographics like? Who are the most vocal people? Would you say?
Sure. So we're an aging community in West Marin, as you would expect, and a lot of the people who have raised there have not been able to stay there as they develop and have families and go on to jobs. So we're struggling with less students in our schools. Less young people in our community for emergencies and emergency preparedness and things like that, and fire volunteers, and all the way down. It's sort of passes all the way down throughout the system, throughout the community, and so we're starting to see a little change in that. Though we're actually in the last couple of years, I've seen young families starting to move back into the community, either through subsidized rental or being able to actually afford to buy in the community. And again, it's kind of about housing supply. All of it's good. Affordable is good, but even market rate housing is good if people can afford it. And so we are seeing some changes in that. I think the dominated by older community for sure, but we're seeing more and more young people taking an interest in being able to come back. And as we develop these rental programs, hopefully that'll be a door opener. I mean, it's going to be really hard because of real estate prices to buy in West Marin. But you never know with opportunities as they start. But at least I have a philosophy that if you can get someone to live in Marin or live in West Marin, they're probably going to like being there, and it might be easier to get them to stay there.
Exactly.
So with Measure W a year or two ago that was passed by last November, passed by the voters, half the money goes to emergency services and half goes to housing. The emergency service people actually have the same issue with no housing for their volunteers. One of them was talking about giving a rental subsidy to young people so that they could be volunteers, fire volunteers, and be able to live in the area, in the district. And so that program is doing a bunch of things. It's providing emergency services, but it's also providing housing for fire volunteers who need to be there.
Right, yeah. We need to take care of our fire volunteers, especially with all the fires that have been happening, all over the state, really, but especially up in the North Bay.
Yeah. And then the other side of the program is actually for housing, and that will go to a lot of the housing people that are doing good work and creating permanent full-time housing. So.
In Measure W, that's the result of increased taxes on short-term rentals, like Airbnbs?
That's correct, yeah. So it was a 4% add to the TOT rate, which was originally set at 10%, and that funding went to the county, to the general fund. What we did was we set up a special district in West Marin, which has about 80% of the short-term rental business in Marin, to set up a 4% premium, and that funding goes back to West Marin. And it's split between affordable housing and permanent housing is what I actually say, because it doesn't necessarily mean it just has to be affordable, and fire and emergency services. And so it's a influx of funding that comes from the short-term rentals that hopefully helps to offset their impacts in the community by creating some of the solutions to their demand for emergency services or the permanent housing that's missing. I might add that emergency services, fire departments, and volunteer fire departments are doing more water rescues now in West Marin than they are fighting fires.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the kind of transition we've had out there.
Oh, like water rescues, like off,
like in the
off
bay
the shore?
or in the ocean. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I
Which
didn't
is
know about
something
that.
brand new to them. 10 years ago, they didn't even have anyone that did that. And now most of their business is actually doing water rescues. So
Yeah, I didn't know that.
yeah. No. Exactly.
I always just kind of, I mean, it makes
Yeah.
sense because, you're off the coast, but I think in the news we hear so much about the fires as well, that
Yeah.
it's climate change and all that.
Yeah, and then on the affordable housing side, it's not a huge amount of money. It's it's a lot of money to West Marin, $750,000 per year, probably a minimum, and it may grow as things change with the short-term rental businesses. But we look at that as seed money to be able to make that deposit on a Friday when a home comes on the market, that if you don't get in the contract that day, it's going to be gone by the end of the weekend to someone else. So it's like seed money to help with rental programs, seed money to provide deposits for people who want to go into a rental. And the barrier that most people have is they don't have the cash for the deposit.
Right, that's huge.
And so,
Deposits can be really hefty as well.
Yeah, I understand in Marin
Speaking
it
from
can
experience.
be as much as $5,000 is what I heard in Marin. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to be creative with that money, so we impact the greatest number of people. And so people, part of the critics have said, well, you can't even buy one house with that money in West Marin. And it's not the intent to buy the house. The intent is to have the seed money to get either in the contract, to go find other grant money to buy the house, or provide other services.
It gives a lot of support from the sound of it.
Yeah, no, it is. It's going to be terrific.
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. And it's ongoing. It's forever. It's always going to be there. And so
there's no expiration or anything?
No expiration.
Oh, that's
It's
great.
a funding source that'll be there forever. Yeah. So very proud of that. And we work very closely with the affordable housing groups in West Marin to get that passed. And ended up passing, we needed 2/3, and it passed by 73%. So.
Do you think there should be any kind of similar measure in the rest of Marin, or is there anything already like that?
It may be that it'd be beneficial for the rest of Marin, but right now there's just not enough short-term rental business. Remember, we're only dealing with the unincorporated parts. Right. So all the cities have their own TOT. The county doesn't participate in that. So in unincorporated Marin, there's just not enough short-term rentals probably to go through a process like this, to go to the voters, and then also splitting it up would be even more difficult because it's really spread out through the rest of unincorporated Marin. I do know that some of the cities are looking at this, and Sausalito, I think, passed a 2% increase last November also, for similar reasons. Theirs was being used for enhancing tourism. So there's different uses, but it's an opportunity to take and earmark money for certain things by the ballot. And the nice thing about doing it at the ballot is I, as a supervisor or some smart budget manager, can't take that money and use it for something else. It's always dedicated for that, unless you go back to the voters. So,
and it's important to kind of, living in a democracy, it's important to listen to what your constituents want as well. So if that's what the majority of the people want, then it's all the more better.
Yeah, no, exactly. And part of the critics for the original TOT was that they're generating all this money in West Marin, but none of it comes back. I think we've shown that that's actually not true, that most of those services come back in fire, police, libraries, and other things, that the roads that the county is providing. It's not as apparent as dollars coming back for specific projects.
Yeah, for specific ones.
Yeah,
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah.
I guess I was also wondering a bit about your the San Geronimo golf course project in terms of it being converted into just the whole process of the land trust buying and purchasing it for public land. I was wondering about your process in terms of converting into new uses.
So currently the county's not involved anymore. We, through the court action, were forced to rescind our purchase agreement with Trust for Public Land. So they are actually the landowner now. And if you know anything about Trust for Public Land, their mission is to protect the environment and the streams and the water. And so I'm sure they'll do a really good job with that. It wasn't the plan for them to hold the property very long because the county had hoped to commit to its purchase agreement, which was to take over ownership of it and have a process, a public process about what the other uses might look like. We were pretty convinced by experts in the golf industry that it wasn't a viable business option being a golf course. And so we thought that because of the open space around it, that it would be a nice opportunity for Marin to have public space there that could be more park-like rather than open space-like. And there's a difference, and what I tell people is the vision I have is more like Stafford Lake Park rather than open space. So I think there's a distinct difference, including a bike pump track out at Stafford Lake. So that sort of use. But we never got to that visioning because of the court case, which the CEQA was challenged, and we lost that challenge. So we actually had to pull back and rescind the purchase agreement and leave Trust for Public Land as the ownership, having the ownership. And it's my understanding that they're going to have a visioning process to see what the uses will be. They're sort of committed to restoring the creeks, restoring the fisheries, and then figuring out what else to do with that property. One of the connections to affordable housing there is, and this is, again, we didn't want to get too far. I don't want to get too far apart in front of any process, but we have to recognize that we have a fire station headquarters in Woodacre that's 12 years ago was identified as being outdated and needed to be replaced. And one of the properties that was identified in that study was the golf course clubroom parcel. And so in a perfect world, I was hoping that we might end up with that as one of the possible uses, to have the fire headquarters there. And the fire headquarters is currently in downtown Woodacre in a residential zone. And so I thought that was the opportunity for affordable housing, was to develop it in a residential zone and have affordable housing amongst housing. And but as far as the golf course, I don't believe the zoning will allow any sort of housing there without a zoning change. But there may be an opportunity for whatever happens on the golf course clubroom parcel to have some sort of housing related to fire, security, whatever the ultimate uses is. There may be able to have, a couple units there, apartments or something that could be for workers who, whatever happens there.
In terms of figuring out zoning for housing in a new area like that, what are some of the barriers that you faced dealing with such a project?
So most of the barriers around zoning in Marin are the precedent of changing all zoning. And that's what people really worry about in Marin, that once you change the zoning in a place that's open space designated to something else, it's going to be an effect all the way down the line that everyone will be coming in to change that. And so I think that's the risk that people see. Is it real? Probably not. But, there is that potential that once you have a precedent, then people can challenge your decision-making to force other things to happen. And I think that's probably what people see as a risk with taking something that's supposed to be recreational and open space, which the golf course is, and changing it to some sort of housing. The other challenges there's two major streams that run through the front nine, one through the front nine and one through the back line. Getting setbacks from that for infrastructure, development, septic would be very challenging, and to build of any density anyway. And so I think that in my mind, in that property, the only thing that's probably developable is the clubroom parcel.
I see.
Because that's where development one is already, and it's the one that's furthest away from all the things that you're trying to protect. And it's 23 acres there, so it's not insignificant.
Yeah, no, that's still a good chunk of land. Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with when the young people like myself are trying to learn more. A lot of it is about we want a lot of transparency in terms of how do you get things built, how do you get things done, zoning and all of that. Also just about where taxes are going to our budgets. I was reading about your work on Measure W, going back to that, about how through that experience, you learned about how complex like the county's budget is. Yeah. I was wondering why it's difficult to really determine how much of the county's budget can really be is allocated towards certain regions like West Marin.
Sure. So it's really complicated because people don't track in individual communities when environmental health or health and human services are doing an action in West Marin. They don't track that cost specifically. Mm-hmm. It's part of the overall budget. So that's kind of hard. Why it's hard to separate it out. We're looking at because of requests by the children advocates and the senior advocates to look more at our budget to see what's actually being spent on children and what's being spent on seniors. So we're kind of looking at that, how to present that in a way that's reasonable and understandable, with the understanding that we have a really complex budget. Mm-hmm. We have a $600 million budget, but the thing to remember is it's 60 to 70% committed funds for mandatory programs in most cases. That means federal or state dollars that come but are attached that you have to provide a program, be whatever it be, social justice or health and human services or whatever. And so we only have discretion on a small part, in other words, 30 to 40% on any given year. And out of that, we have to do all our fire safety, sheriff safety, DA's office, all the programs, our roads, public works. So it's really challenging to take and meet the mandatory requirements and then have enough money left to do everything else. Having said that, I think if you looked at the Department of Finance website, it'd be kind of interesting to you because we have very big tax bills. But at the end of the day, from our basic tax, only about 20% of it ends up in the county coffers. The rest of it goes to schools, to the state, to other things. So I equate this to someone that has a $1,000 tax bill a year. Only $200 of that would be actually going to the county. And so if you thought about that, if you're a pre-Prop 13 property owner, you could actually be paying $1,000 a month if you had your property a long time. $200 of that money is going to all the things that you benefit from the county, including roads, sheriff, fire. And so I think putting it into perspective is that even though we have large tax bills, and a lot of them are add-on with partial tax, for different things that people approve by the voters, and the basic tax, the county ends up with only a fairly small portion of that to do all the services that we do. So it's very challenging. It's very competitive and very challenging to meet the demands. So, but we have been able to put things like $12 million into road repairs this next year because of all the tax measures that have passed in the state and locally. We put $7 million into the housing trust in anticipation of the Coast Guard property being purchased, and not only purchasing that, but we wanted to make sure that the fund is not depleted. So there'd be other opportunities because that housing fund, even though it's a county program, is available to all the cities in the county too. So other people can apply for that grant funding. And that's the funding that provides grants for like the housing unit that Clam bought in Point Reyes. That grant funding provided $150,000 of that $800,000 purchase, and then MCF provided funding, and then there was a loan on the property that the family that ended up buying it assumed. So it's a complicated process to put those together.
It sounds very complicated.
But many different sources come together to provide the grant money that makes that $800,000 affordable for that family. And their mortgage is $300,000 or something. So at the end of the day, and then they also agree to keep it affordable. That's part of it. Clam probably in that case owns the land, and they lease it to the property owner, the homeowner, and they agree to keep it affordable forever. Which is wonderful program.
I think that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. What do you think are some ways that can streamline some of these complicated, complex processes?
So in Marin, we seem to do much better with senior housing, and I think it's because our community is aging and the need for senior housing, to have seniors safely in housing is really important to our community. So I think that's probably why it's much more acceptable. And from my perspective, that's okay to build senior housing because when a senior vacates their current housing to go into a senior housing, that becomes supply. And, if The challenge is it's supply at market rate in most cases, but they could be rented. And then if you have other programs that can backstop either purchasing, with a silent second program or something that you could help people afford to buy, or for rentals, get into rentals, those become, again, good supply. So I don't want to, I want to make sure we appreciate that the senior housing that people seem to accept in Marin is not totally negative when it comes to affordable housing, because ultimately it can turn into something, or at least housing supply at the end of the day.
Yeah,
I think that's important.
I totally agree.
Because we have trouble building anything,
right.
So we have to take advantage of build what we can.
It's good to have more supply, and it's important to take care of our elders as well.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one of the things going on. Certainly we're seeing within the cities and downtown cities like Santa Fe, they're doing a lot of projects with mixed zoning, which I think works really well. Again, is acceptable in a lot of our communities, where you keep the commercial aspect on the first floor and then put some residential above. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. In particular, I know in Novato, there's that shopping center on the west side that's almost in my district, not quite. But again, the neighbors up there have told me if it's all residential, they don't think they like that. But if we can keep the commercial where they can go get their bread and milk and donuts and other services, they'd be happy with some residential there. So I think it's finding that balance, what works in our communities. And it's not the same everywhere, but I think finding that sweet spot when you want to do something, be it senior housing or mixed developments, where you keep some commercial and keep some community about the housing, where the mixed use with commercial sort of keeps the community engaged and keeps the community involved in that development. So
I agree, and Marin County is a very close, tightly knit community as well. So it's always important to keep that character. I was wondering, when you're talking about mixed use housing and combining residential with commercial, do you think that could also work as some sort of incentive for developers to build more if they know that? If people are more attracted to their residential homes being near, a good grocery store or other forms of entertainment, it'll make the property value go
I think
up.
that's where some of the bonuses can enhance developers, where they may have a 3-story building that's approved, and if they do it in a way that's sensitive to the city, maybe they should get an extra floor out of it that could be residential, affordable residential or something. So I think, again, looking at infrastructure, looking at cities' capabilities of dealing with that extra story from a fire perspective or other needs perspective. But I think that's where developers can be enhanced to work with the city more. And I think at the end of the day, developers really want to just make a profit. They don't care if they're building commercial or residential. They at the end of the day, they want to get a return on their investment. And I think if we can work with them, I think they'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right, yeah, it's all about finding those ways to make sure that, I guess, everyone's happy. People can get the housing that they want, but also in order to get the developers to build, you have to find some sort of incentives. And I feel like it's really important to have more of a conversation about how we can do that as well.
And you probably know that there's developments in this country where things are being incorporated within the development, not just commercial and mixed use, but daycare and other things that people have gyms and have things in that one facility, so that families can appreciate all the conveniences without having to drive, without having to do many things. So right now we have a lot of driving involved in what we do in Marin, driving from one place to the other, and I think also recognizing that and trying to resolve some of that by having things closer and places you can buy your newspaper and milk right where you live. Mm-hmm. It makes sense.
Do you hope to see more places like that incorporate more homes or apartment complexes that incorporate more perks along the 101 corridor, as a future for Marin?
I think there's an opportunity there, and I think it also is good from an economic point of view for the local city or government too, to have that mixed use and more vibrant communities, because I think that's what really people want. They don't want to. I can remember many years ago when I went to L.A. the first time, downtown L.A., and was downtown at 8 o'clock at night, and I couldn't believe there was no one there. It was totally empty. It was a ghost town, and I was totally shocked. And I go, wow. nobody would want this. You'd want a vibrant downtown community, but it was the first time I realized that people roll up the sidewalk sometimes in some communities, and I think that's a shame. When we need more housing, we need people to be have a more vibrant life and have opportunities. So.
Yeah, what do you think we can do to encourage more vibrant communities in Marin, especially, or what can we do to incorporate some of the workers that commute from East Bay or all the way over here?
Well, that's really the challenge, is to what types of programs and incentives you could put into place for people to be able to live in nearer where they work. The county currently is negotiating with the unions on a rental subsidy program, so that employees can actually have a mechanism for getting help to rent in Marin and live in Marin. And we're hoping, again, the philosophy is that if people start living here, they may want to stay here and find other ways, or we can be creative with other programs to help them extend that to home ownership or whatever. And so I think it takes a lot of creativeness, and it's going to have to involve our businesses, the people that are providing our employment. And I think region-wise, Bay Area-wise, we're suddenly starting to see some recognition that businesses need to take responsibility too.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you support a more regional approach or a more local approach? Because there's also been different bills coming up, such as AB 1487, which is trying to establish HABA, a regional housing authority.
We're struggling a little bit with that in Marin, the elected officials, and it's only because originally it was creating another super agency. And we didn't think that was a good way to go, another agency that had large administrative costs, that we thought we actually had agencies that could do this job. So I'm pleased to see it's back in discussion, that MTC and ABAG may either jointly or individually be the agency of responsibility. The other issue we're having, we're not sure, we're not convinced that people will support taxes that will go for this cause. So we're a little worried that without some confidence of success there, it's going to go nowhere and not have any funding. And so we're just being really cautious. We think it's a good idea. We think we need to generate funding, but we're just being a little cautious about going down a path that has a lot of costs related to it. Somebody's going to have to pay it and not being successful.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the increased taxes to me kind of sound to me a little similar to what's been done with Measure W, which seems to benefit. But that's also a much smaller region rather than the entire county.
That's right. Yeah, this would be Bay Area wide.
Right.
And I think that Marin, and also Marin has some sensitivity, and I think some of the other smaller counties and cities, that they're going to get swallowed up in this big agency that's got funding capabilities, but we're not going to get much of the funding because the larger agencies, larger counties are going to dominate it. And so I think there's some sensitivity around that. But for the most part, cities in Marin don't want to be told how to do things, and they want to do it their own way. Right. And I think that we need to be sensitive to that and figure out ways to work with them, allowing them to make their own decisions, but also subsidize, give them carrots when they're doing a good job, with extra funding or extra grants, but not necessarily penalize them. Because you got to remember, at the end of the day, cities and counties don't build housing; they only permit them. Mm-hmm. And so, it takes developers, it takes affordable land, it's a lot of other parts of it that are really complicated, and it's not always come down to the city's just approval. We can do a better job with our approvals and streamlining our processes, but again, it still doesn't mean that housing is going to get built, because it's a business model. It's an economic decision at the end of the day.
Do you think that I agree that, giving carrots, encouraging cities rather than penalizing them, it seems to be a healthier, more community-based approach.
Yeah, and then there's some talk about penalizing people on the transportation funding side, and I don't think that's a good thing to be doing, because people, on a principle, people who have approved RM3 and SB1 at the state legislators for transportation funding, and so now you're going to say we're going to take that funding away from you because you're not doing something over here well enough. I'm much more in favor of saying reward good behavior, but don't take transportation funding badly needed transportation funding away because you're not doing quite a good job over here.
Right. I know that was one of like Governor Newsom's policies to penalize like certain counties that don't follow through. I think one of the issues though is that do you feel as if some cities like they're maybe just not, they don't see or they're not doing enough about how urgent like affordable housing needs are?
I think definitely there's that case, and probably in Marin too, that we just don't do enough for a variety of reasons, and we need to encourage that. But again, that's where the carrot comes in. Encourage it through rewarding, not necessarily penalizing, because I just personally don't feel penalizing ever works very well.
Right.
No.
Yeah, I would imagine. Like, do you think proposals for a top-down approach is really just coming out of the frustration of like things not getting done?
Yeah. Yeah, we have, I forget what the number was. Was it 3.5 million units we're short in California or something? It's a crazy, unbelievable number. And quite honestly, my experience as a builder is I can't see that we can build our way out of this. I just don't see it being possible. We're too far behind. And does that mean we don't do anything? No. But I think we need to grab every opportunity we can and make that change so that we continually do something. And again, I think if we have programs that have too big a grab or too big a wish, we're going to be forever battling getting something built. And there's going to be people objecting. There'll probably be legal challenges. There'll be, I'm much more on the side of let's get something done today and make a difference today.
Don't let the housing crisis get even worse. Or
yeah, exactly. Try and maintain and keep up. So.
And hopefully improve, but it's obviously extremely difficult.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I was also wondering what you think. What are different forums where more people can get involved in terms of being vocal about the issues that they most care about in both like Marin County and also like in West Marin? Yeah.
So much of the challenges to county government is that we don't get to hear from all our citizens. And a lot of reasons for that. But we don't hear from our immigrants or minorities or low income because they're too busy in their own lives providing food and rent and putting that on the table. Often millennials may fall into that category too, or they're too busy in their lives or committed to other things. But one of the things that I've noticed at county government is that we really hear from a certain group all the time, and it'd be really nice to expand that, to hear some NextGen and other young people.
We're trying to do that.
Yeah,
so
and I told you about 5G,
right.
Both workshops on 5G. It didn't seem like there was anyone in the room under 50.
Which I find interesting given how, the younger generation is all about their cell phones and their technology, but I guess it's about different attitudes.
Yeah,
towards
and
too.
There's a Young Democrats group that's struggling to get organized, and there's possibly a Democratic Latino group that's trying to get organized, and I think that's great. I think at the end of the day, what I learned growing up and what I learned in everything I was involved in, you have to get involved to make a difference.
Of course.
Because sitting on the sidelines, then you're just going to get whatever happens to you. And early on, probably from my family, my father, I learned that even though he had 2 jobs and 5 kids, he always had time to work on something at the school, to get a bond measure passed for a new school, or to work at Little League. And I think that instilled in me that you need to get out and be involved. And that's my challenge to you guys is get out and be involved, because if we don't hear from you, we're going to assume that you're okay with what's going on.
Just complicit when we shouldn't be.
Yeah. And I think that this country is in a transition where there's been a lot of people just sitting back and watching, and I think that's going to change with our new federal government, the way things are going, and hopefully people will go out and vote in November and March, fill out the census. That's the other important thing going on right now, is to make sure that everyone gets counted, because everyone getting counted relates to how well we can do services for the next 10 years in our counties and cities with federal dollars. And so, it's sort of crucial things that you can do just by voting and doing the census, and then being engaged in city council meetings and community meetings and and certainly pay attention to the county. We have a lot of commissions that we appoint people to, and we strive to have young people represented on those commissions.
How many young people, or I think one general trend question I'm really curious about is voter turnout among young people is always generally pretty low in this country. Voter turnout overall is low, but I know that with the last presidential election, voter turnout among young people was at an all-time high. Would you say that, did you see that trend in Marin County? I mean, even though there's still not that many young people involved here, would you say that, have you seen more people?
I think in general, they're engaged to vote. I think there's enough groups out there encouraging registration and vote. Now, actually voting is another issue, because I think there's, you all the time find people that tell you they're going to vote, and you find out maybe they didn't for some other reason. But I think for the most part, people do want to vote here in Marin. We have a high turnout in Marin, and I think people are engaged. But then again, we need to make it easier for people to vote too, so that you can, I think now you can register the same day that you vote. You can turn in your absentee ballot late now. I think we're going to go to, not this year, this cycle, but maybe in November a year, to centralized voting places where there'll be 12 or 15 places throughout the county where you can, for over a 2-week period, go and vote. So I think people want to make it convenient to vote. And I think that will be the answer probably for our youngsters, our next gen people, to have more convenience. And who knows, maybe we'll be voting on our phone one day. So.
Right. I mean, I think in terms of civic engagement, like what you just mentioned, a lot of people's excuses, oh, I don't have the time to. Yeah. I know that it's like state law that, you know, when it's election day, you're supposed to get time off of work to go vote. But I really wish that like election day was actually a holiday.
Yeah.
You know, if you really want to encourage
discussion
like,
about that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, that would be good. And some countries, as you know, require you to vote. You have actually get a penalty if you don't vote. I think Australia still has that. Yeah, but that's challenging too, because someone has to enforce those rules. So they only have 20 million people. We have 260 million, so it might be a little harder to enforce that in our country.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of you just mentioned commissioners and, you know, hoping to see more young people getting involved in that. I mean, how much experience do you say a lot of the people are on those commissions? Because I feel like
I think it's a high level of interest. I think people think, for example, if I'm a senior, that I fit on the aging commission. But that's not necessarily true. It's really what skills you bring. I just recently interviewed a lady for the Aging Commission that's in her late 40s, but she brings a lot of skills dealing with seniors, doing home nursing, doing a bunch of things. So she probably would be a really good fit for that commission. So I think that to remember that you don't always need a lot of experience, but sometimes your profession leads to types of commission you might be interested in. And really it's willing to serve. That willingness to serve is really, really important. And I know we look for young people. People of color and young people are priorities for all the board.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, I think people can get intimidated by it, or they think, especially when like everybody else is older than you too.
Exactly, yeah. But you know, our youth commission is something that and some of you maybe took part in. I'm not sure, but they're a very active 24-member commission, 23-member commission. I think they range from 13 to 22 or something. And so naturally there's a restriction there, but it's a nice mix of people for a broad amount of age that work together on all sorts of things. So there's a lot of opportunity from, you know, different things that you may or may not be interested in. So there's on the website, the county website, it talks about all the commissions, from the library commission to aging to human rights. What else is out there? Parks and Open Space Commission. So there's a lot of opportunities, and we all look for people who better represent Marin. So
yeah, definitely
great opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great for like more people to be able to like hear from you. I was wondering, I'm sure it's on your website as well, like what opportunities do you have to be for more people to like come speak with you one-on-one about issues? And
Sure. So we have a fairly open office. My door is I noticed this changed a little bit. My door is one of the few supervisor offices that's always open if I'm not in a meeting.
I like that transparency.
And it's just a welcoming. It's
Yeah.
welcome to come and talk with me. Actually, you got to go through the clerk to get to me, but besides that, but they know
Yeah.
I'm available, and they'll come in and say, someone's here. Would you like to? Can you talk to them? But you can contact either of my aides. We're always open for meetings in the community or at the office. We'd love to meet with you all. We'd love to know what you're doing. Meet with your group more often. Talk to you guys. And
Yeah,
see
we
what's
would love
going
to
on
do
in
that
your
more.
life. Yeah, no, it's terrific, and that's part of. Not only part of the job, but it's part of how I learn what my community's saying. Because if I got stuck in the office at the Civic Center and never came out, I wouldn't have a clue what's going on. And so I need to get out in the community and talk to people and meet with people and see what their interests are. And as I develop relationships, it's great because I have your contact, and something comes up, I can use you for a resource too. In reverse, contact you and say, what do you think about this? or do you guys might want to come pay attention to this? This is something that's going on at the county that you might be interested in. So
Yeah, no, I like
perfect opportunity.
I like the opportunity for partnerships too.
Yeah,
and just
terrific.
because I think a lot of our motto, we like to say like educate, advocate, mobilize too.
Sure.
So we're trying to get more to educating people through like the public, through having podcasts, people like yourself,
Yeah,
but
terrific,
also
yeah.
like the advocacy part of that, and mobilization super important.
Sure. That's
Yeah.
really important. And as you know, I spend a lot of time in my district. So we have office hours twice a year, and there's 13 places we have to go because my district is so large that we actually have to go, and not have to go, we want to go and have office hours to meet with our different community members. So we do that in the fall and the spring, and it's really, part of what we do and part of how we get our knowledge and understanding of what our communities are talking about and what they're interested in. So
It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
thank you. Yeah, thanks for
and
having
just
me.
learning so much about all the different projects going on, and
Good.
learning more about ways to connect with you and like the rest of the community. And we're really excited to like learn more about everything that you're doing in terms
Good.
of supporting affordable housing. And so
Terrific.
it's been great.
Looking forward to seeing you all at the board
Yes.
chambers and on different issues. And you're always welcome to come. Every board meeting, there's open time where you can speak about anything you want, including talking about affordable housing.
Right. I
if you
think
want.
part of the issue is sometimes I think those meetings are like while people work like during the
Yeah,
morning. But I mean,
yeah.
we'll be there.
No, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're trying to shift that to having the things we think are most important, where public is most interested in evening meetings and stuff. So, yeah, but sometimes the schedule's a little hard to do that. But we often try and do that. But certainly it's broadcast, so you can follow what's going on too. So
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Broadcast,
Thank you
yeah.
so much.
thank you.
Thank you for listening to our latest podcast. For more information, check out our website at nextgenmarin.com, and be sure to follow us on social media via our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.